Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now, this morning we're heading to Zambia, where Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema has asked the country's parliament to remove the death penalty. In an address to mark Africa Day, the annual commemoration of the foundation of the Organization of African Unity, President Hakainde Hichilema announced that his government wanted to end death sentences and focus on the preservation, rehabilitation of life whilst still delivering justice for all.
Despite Zambia being a Christian nation, it still has the death penalty law, which is in conflict with the Declaration of a Christianity Nation. To give us more on this perspective, or more rather on this development, we have media and public policy specialist Kelly Kaunda, who joins us live from Zambia. Good morning, Mr. Kaunda. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, guys. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor.
Good to see you. Now, let's talk about how progressive this move by the president is, of course, towards giving dignity to humanity, as it has been described. Do you think that it is progressive, as it has been termed?
Well, just a little background. You may want to know that previous presidents, from President Kaunda towards the end of his term of office, who was Zambia's first president, and the third president, President Mwanawasa, they instituted constitution review commissions. And one of the terms of reference that the Zambians were expected to deal with was the question of the death penalty. Did they want the death penalty? I attended I was a delegate in one of the commission reviews which took place here in Lusaka, because they conducted provincial discussions so that they're able to get views from different sections of Zambians. And the discussion during the Lusaka Provincial Review Commission was to the effect that Zambians wanted the death penalty to be retained in the constitution and in the subsidiary legislation. And it was interesting, some of the reasons that were given. One, the traditional arguments that are given that the death penalty serves as a deterrent to would-be offenders. There are some people that were caught in the Bible that in the Old Testament, the death penalty was practiced. I was of the view at that time too that yes, from a biblical point of view, if we are a Christian nation, we needed to retain the death penalty because it's the only form of punishment that demonstrated the seriousness of the offense. But I would like to believe that over the years, the views could have changed. And it would be interesting if the president subjected this to both parliament as well as the entire country. In fact, this question would need to be put to the entire country to see if people's views have changed over the death penalty.
All right, let's talk about the possibility of this happening. You mentioned that there are several arguments for and against the death penalty, and President Hakainde Hichilema has come out to say that his tenure, he hopes to mark the end of the death penalty. Do you see that happening?
It is, like I've said, it will be interesting to see if this question is put back to the Zambian people to decide. I do not think that it will be enough to simply rely on members of parliament. There are already discussions in the country that while the law appears to be ambiguous in terms of whether it is parliament that can amend this part of the constitution or it needs to be put to parliament, because you see, the reason why some feel that this question might need to be put to the referendum is because the right to life is contained in the Constitution. But it is also the constitutional provision that also says that this right can only be taken away if someone has been subjected to the law that provides for taking the life away from an individual. So there's a possibility that there's going to be some argument as to whether this question must be taken to Parliament alone or it must be subjected to a referendum. Is it possible that Zambians could have changed their mind on this? It is very difficult to say, but I get the feeling that Zambians may not have changed their view because there are people that feel that the declaration of Zambia as a Christian nation justifies using the death penalty because the death penalty was used in the Old Testament. However, for me, my understanding of those biblical arguments now, is that biblically God sanctioned the use of the death penalty for purposes of, directing the nation of Israel to one death penalty that was going to take place. And that is that there was a Messiah that was going to come, and that Messiah was going to pay this death penalty for the sin of mankind. So if you're going to make theological arguments, then you would say that when Christ died on the cross, that symbolism of the death penalty came to an end. So this side of the cross, then you don't need to use the death penalty, because this side of the cross, the biblical argument is that God is saying that I've written my law in your hearts. So people do not need to make a reference to, some physical demonstration of the death penalty in relation to the forgiveness of sin. They have to look inwardly, because God has put the law inside our hearts, and that is the reference point.
It must be, a little hard selling that to victims of very heinous crimes that in other times would deserve the death penalty. But let's also talk about the human rights angle to this. You spoke about the right to life and how it's a fundamental right, in that country. But will, this being repealed also boost the morale of human rights activists in the country?
Yes, and it will be interesting if to see how those that make arguments from a rights point of view would sell this. Remember that in case you do not know this, and I can understand, Zambia is a signatory to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which it signed and ratified. But at the same time, Zambia is also a signatory to the protocol, which is a rider to the ICCPR, which is the protocol that allows individual Zambians to petition the United Nations Committee on Human Rights. But Zambia is not a signatory to the second protocol, which talks about abolition of the death penalty. The second protocol says that encourages nations to abolish the death penalty, but it also says that for those nations that find it imperative to maintain it, that they should only apply it in very extreme circumstances, whatever those extreme circumstances would be. And secondly, from a human rights point of view, I think the argument that should be made is that in the 21st century, with a centrality on human rights, Zambia should be able to move towards the abolition of the death penalty. That the death penalty does deter people from committing further offenses of a similar nature. But then how do you explain the fact that despite that deterrence argument, and despite the fact that, yes, people get hung, we still continue to see, these offenses committed? In any case, if it were a deterrence, how would it be? Because first of all, Zambians don't even get to know whether someone is when someone is being executed. It's different from countries like the United States when a death penalty is being carried out, because what happens is that there's publicity around it. The media is called in to cover the story. In the chamber room where the death penalty is being carried out, of course, there's a glass separating. Where it is actually happening. But at least there are witnesses, and the story is quite big. Maybe in the countries like the United States, you could make that argument. But in a country like Zambia, where, when they were being carried out, they were being carried out without the knowledge of the public. I don't know how that would be how that would be a deterrent. The last time those penalties were carried out in Zambia, the death penalty was actually carried out in Zambia by execution. It was back in 1997, or when there were about 78 on the death row that were executed. But even those, there was no publicity around it. So there's no way of telling how the public is reacting to this. And as long as they are carried out in secret, there is no way it is going to be a deterrence on, on anybody. So those that are arguing from a human rights point of view might have a point, but it depends on how they're going to package their arguments.
Well, pretty interesting, and these aren't very popular conversations that you'd expect in many African countries, but it's a good thing that we're speaking about this, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Kaunda, and we wish you a great week ahead.